Just speaking of staffing, EPA comes to mind. I know we've talked a lot about Clean Water Act and other, I guess the IRA quite a bit too, but I wanted to just touch base on the EPA with regard to the freeze. Anything come to mind?
Well, there's a lot going on at the EPA at the moment.
I heard at one point there was a planned 65% reduction in the workforce from the EPA as well. I'm not sure if it's true this minute, but it was at least at one point.
It's going to continue to bottleneck, to Dirk's point. There's going to be a lot of issues related to pollution, and I'm sure Dirk would like to speak of PFAS at some point about these regulations that have happened that aren't going to be staffed and kept up on because they don't have the people there to really regulate their own guidance and policies.
Well, you're even seeing a pushback with the standards set, with the criteria set, with the cleanup goals, things that hit me directly every day and hit our whole staff every day is these goals. As those goals get set aside, as PFAS, forever chemical that you hear a lot about on the news channels, one that just became a CERCLA material. So CERCLA determines what a hazardous substance is, and that determines what we look for in due diligence, what the cleanup standards are, the toxicological standards. All that comes out of CERCLA. PFAS became a CERCLA chemical, CERCLA substance, last June or July. That prompted a big change in the way we do our work. That prompted a huge change for all our clients, which are looking at farm fields for renewables, looking at wastewater treatment plants, looking at all kinds of stuff that we have always done for them. PFAS now is on the desk to possibly even being taken back off the list. So we took a year.
And that just happened, right?
It's just discussed last week or the week before last that there's a sense that it might roll completely off the substance list. What's more interesting is, and maybe in a true sense, a true chemistry sense, I have some comfort in what they're in the rollback in some ways, because what standard did they really create? Did they pick a number? Did a toxicologist have 10 years of study to determine what the right effects would be? Human health, environmental health, aquatic species health. We don't know a lot of that. So I think you're seeing a lot of pushback in the last month or two, last 60 days from the administration on who set the standard, who set that screening limit. And that's what we're seeing pushback. So we have clients calling every day, what are we going to do about this? Well, in some states, we came back to that a little earlier, the states have some numbers. Some states have done their own screening. So Michigan, the northern states that have a lot of water sitting in clay and sitting in lakes are more prone to have PFAS holding times, different than states that are rivers where it's just rushing through and you don't see it. So we're very concerned with what those numbers are going to be. And if they roll it back completely, then where do we start? I mean, we have the still joint severable liability. Everyone's on the hook. And right now, they played exemptions with farmers and a few other entities that have been working well for our clients who are leasing versus buying land. But if that all comes back, I don't know where that's going to head. It's going to be a difficult time and a confusing time for our clients.
So Dirk, you spoke about delisting of a CERCLA listed hazardous substance. Has there been a case for that in the past? Anything come to mind that we can look to see what might happen? What are the implications?
You know, that's a good question. I can't recall a single one.
Yeah, we're kind of in uncharted territory with this.
Asbestos gets added, silica gets added.
Sure.
I don't recall anything ever going backwards. Now, we've seen changes in criteria. As we learn more, that's happening a lot. We're seeing changes in vapor intrusion into buildings, vapor intrusion into HUD homes and housing developments from various chemicals that are out there that are on that list. We're seeing a lot of modification of standards based on equipment, technology, computers. Everything can change a normal and just biological studies of our own bodies. What the doctors can do is so much more incredible now than even 20 years ago. But completely rolling it back off would be very, very unusual because it's going to come back sooner or later.
I'm not sure their goal is to take the science and make it a science-based determination. I mean, they not only PFAS, we're talking rolling back the amount of mercury.
Yes.
Power plants can put in the air. We're talking. We were just discussing off air that Supreme Court just ruled to allow more sewage, raw sewage, to be released in our waterways from industrial wastewater plants. So, I mean, it's more wide scale, and when it's wide scale, that means they're not using science.
Right.
They're not using the data that it takes to really make good decisions on rolling things back or increasing them.
It's
much
wild
more-
though, because you think about the cost-benefit analysis
Oh.
of this and how much money it's going to take to clean up
Yeah.
some of this when like we were already marching towards progress where as we are cleaning it up, it's getting cheaper, right? If you've started that process, so then why deregulate to the point where then you're going to have to spend all this money again cleaning it back up at some point? It's just,
Well,
We've
you
seen
can
this.
take Flint. You can take Flint
Yeah.
as an
Sure.
example, right? When they switched the source, Legionnaire's disease was rampant because it had chemicals in the water that they were using, for drinking water. And the city, I think, owes these people millions
sure.
and millions and millions of dollars that they're just starting to pay out now after 7 years of sitting on that. But people got sick.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't stuff to play with.
no. Well, and there's been years, I'm sure, of this PFAS building up, of the science building up to be able to get you to the point where it becomes listed, right?
Well, the
Yes.
biggest
Yeah,
contaminant.
so it's like a lot of science already
It's already-
there
yes.
to get you to this
50
point.
years of
right.
science, right? We're 50
The
years
biggest
of science.
contaminator of PFAS is the federal government anyway.
Yes.
It's our military bases that use it as fighter fighting fluids. It's the foam.
It's everywhere too.
And it's
this is
everywhere.
the problem,
It's
and
in
it's
everything.
and it is. It's a forever chemical. It sits in your body. It needs to be regulated. We need to find ways to fight it. I mean, science is just emerging that actually gets it, that can fight it, break it down, and make it usable. But this is crazy.
There's even a pushback on the TSCA component, the Toxic Substances Control Act. So PFAS, I think of PFAS always in the CERCLA sense, in the clean up the environment
Yeah,
sense,
right.
but not the study sense. Where did it come from? There's
Yeah.
TSCA now requires, not so many of our clients yet, but provides manufacturers, which there are about 30 of them in this country, plus the articles that could have it from foreign nations as part of what is supposed to be determined, set on paper, put in databases dating from 2011 to 2021. That's now frozen. So we're at a position where we spent this effort to try to determine it, so we have the toxicological standards that we can create. But some of the pushback really is because a lot of folks believe, and certainly this administration believes, that the EPA didn't do any testing on. They picked a number because the machine could pick it. The machine could say 4 parts per trillion. I don't agree with that, I think, when you look at the states. But we're dealing it with soil. No one has created a soil criteria nationwide yet. Some of the states will pick a number, but there's only a water standard for direct ingestion. So there's so much that more needs to be done.
But you usually start somewhere. You need somewhere to start, right? So you pick a number that's reasonable in what the science shows you, and then you learn more as you go, and then that number changes, and it's done that forever.
And sometimes it can be relaxed, that number. Sometimes it has to be realistic. If you can't even clean something up to that number, is that the number you want?
Right.
Because then no one will ever get it cleaned up.
Right.
So it's,
But I think it's really important to say is that most of these regulations have been in place for a very long time. Corporations, responsible governments, whatever, have been living and abiding by these regulations for years. It is no more cost, it is.
Systems are already in place.
Systems are in place, regulations in place. To pull it back for,
And you're still making money.
of course they're
Still
profitable.
making money.
I mean, geez, oil and gas industry is the most profitable, group of individuals there is, right? So why pull it back? Why pull back the regulation? It just it doesn't speed up permitting timeframes. It doesn't make it, it doesn't. Anyway, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole
Chelsea,
here if I keep going.
You touched on something I wanted to go back to, and not as a subject matter expert myself in this, but something that we've seen just in the coming up on a year now since PFAS was designated as a CERCLA
Hazardous substance.
substance. Thank you. It's the economy of scale pricing considerations, right? I mean, when you consider one-off, I mean, we see this with our clients all the time, Rebecca, and that is, wreck determinations in phase ones used to be a dirty word, right? Don't find a
Yes.
wreck on my site. I will walk from a site if you find a wreck. Once you start wrapping your head around the economy of scale savings of phase twos and remediation oversight and PFAS and brownfield, it becomes a viable
Yes.
development strategy, right? And we've seen that just in the short time since PFAS has been listed. And so that's my concern is Now rolling back these or changing these policies, we're back to now a one-off consideration where those types of considerations, those cleanups are no longer economically viable, right? Because you're not doing it programmatically, speaking for like a municipality that's worried about wastewater discharge or treatment, or a national developer that's looking at a portfolio of gigawatts, right, of energy production. And so I think from a project delivery standpoint, that's where the rubber really hits the road on the regs.
You know, Chelsea, I want to go backwards on something that you said, and that is we're worried about regulatory weakening. But in my view, the reality is our commercial standards, our industries, our companies, our automobile companies, our typical polluters, they've developed so many processes
Yes.
and in place for their air, for their wastewater. They're not going to go backwards.
You would hope so. You'd hope so.
I would, they're built, they better not be going backwards.
Right.
I mean, they're using solar farms at community level for factories. We're using solar farms to power the pump jacks in Texas all over the place. So I'm hoping that we see a little temporary blip, this is a weird relaxation of rules, but that I think our industries, our community, our society will push the environmental position regardless of if the EPA can't make a decision on a PFAS criteria in Massachusetts.
And I think it goes back to this idea that our clients should continue to do what they've done
Yes.
in
Yes.
the past.
Well, on
They
a
should
much
document
smaller scale.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how our clients can achieve regulatory closure for something at the state or the federal level from a contamination perspective a decade or so ago. But then when we revisit the site, we may need to readdress how things were closed or how they were evaluated then, just to bring them up to current standard. So I can see this PFAS issue, if it is truly walked back over the coming months or years, having to revisit it again, and it just be the same cycle.
Until they get
4
sued
years.
again.
Yeah.
So but this,
Yeah, in 4
this
years,
is
5
right.
years.
Yes.
We're gonna be, yeah.
Well,
We've seen that in our industry for decades already, with the change in arsenic positioning,
Sure.
the change in
Yep.
mercury, which you
Yep.
mentioned, Bobby. We've seen that a bit, and we can pivot with that. Our clients pivot with that, and we're experienced enough to understand that pivot. But we also know the formulas. We also know the math behind how those numbers were created. So we ourselves can manipulate. Maybe that's the wrong word. We can work with those numbers. We can adjust criteria on exposure limits and exposure risk, and come up with those numbers. And well, I think that's where our clients are going to expect that from the community.
Well, and corporations are made of people, and people by and large want clean water and clean air and to not get cancer.
Yeah.
Right? So they are going to make the decisions, and to your point on the economy of scale, they're going to want to make decisions that sometimes affect their pocketbooks for the greater good because they're people and they want the same things that everybody else wants. And so I think that to a certain extent, we might see some companies decide to kind of pivot in a pretty drastic way, but by and large, most people are going to stay status quo.
And we were just talking about how we haven't heard some of the major funders of things like ESG and some of those more progressive ideas not walk back yet.
No.
And plus, a lot of investors in the U.S. Are foreign governments or
Right.
foreign
We
companies.
have a global economy to consider
Yes,
with a lot of this
which
regulation.
keeps some of that regulation and those requirements still first and foremost. So yeah, I think the status quo of continuing to do what you did before, make sure that you've documented, done the research you need to plan the way you need to kind of move a project forward. I think we'll see some consistency in that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, some of the largest players in the U.S. energy market are foreign, financially
Companies,
backed
yeah.
entities, right? And the same, even if you boil it down, take away from the private industry and go to public side, the expectation set on municipalities and public entities to, I don't want to use the word conform, but model what European entities and Australian entities are doing, that's an expectation they're going to carry forward, right? So yes, there's going to be some considerations for local constituents and coastal resiliency for
Yeah.
coastal communities here in the U.S., but by and large, they're modeling global economic drivers and systems and processes and regulations. So I think even if we see that trend continue here in the States with some deregulation of environmental policy, it's not gonna be a 180-degree pivot from what
We haven't
we've been
even
used to.
started to touch the idea of the insurance that's necessary when you
course.
start messing with requirements and things that protected communities. I mean, we haven't even touched that, and there's definitely this idea that it's going to get really expensive to live in certain areas of the United States at some point, and these regulations were trying to slow that. I mean, our typical regulations were trying to slow this kind of speeding bullet we are going towards to, maybe not so habitable areas.
Well, it's so much more expensive to fix it after it's
Yeah,
been
of
broken
course.
than just to try to keep it functioning, right, before it breaks. So it is disheartening to see some of this, but by and large, I personally believe that people are going to step up and do the right thing and continue to do the things that are better for the environment and for people.
And we'll
by
have
and
those
large.
guardrails like you were talking about earlier at the state and local levels as well. They'll be in place even if a corporation didn't have
Right.
society's best interest in mind. Yeah, we'll still have those protections.